All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting edition of the Liquid Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, Karl Meisterheim. With me, as always, is the amazing Taylor Page. Hello, Taylor.
Hello, Karl. It's been a minute, buddy. I'm glad to see you.
Taylor, have you ever used a website and wondered, how could I make this website more accessible? Or have you ever worked on a project and had someone ask you to make it more accessible and had absolutely no idea what that means or how to do it?
Yes to both.
Me too. And I'm concerned about you, and so I went out through you and found this amazing guy at Shopify that you connected with, Scott Vinkle, and he is a accessibility specialist. And so I'm finding he's here to talk with us today. So, Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank
How are
you.
you?
Thanks for having me. Very good. How are you guys?
We're great.
Doing
Awesome.
good, man. Excited to learn more. It's every time I think I know something, some version or amount of accessibility, you will drop a blog post, and I'm like, I learned like 10 new things, and so I'm excited to get to chat today. It's awesome.
Yeah, we're super stoked.
It's on learning. It's an ongoing journey. Honestly, I'm always learning myself. Been doing this for a long time, and every time that I try to do something else or try to do something new, I'll learn something new, and it's just like, okay, still learning. So we're all in this together.
Right. Well, we appreciate you coming on to make this more accessible to us as a topic. I feel like for developers, it's a challenge because, we're so used to the zeros and ones, the hard facts of coding. Accessibility, when I've worked on it in the past, it seems like a much more cloudy sort of topic where sometimes it's clear what you should do, sometimes it's more of a suggestion. And so anything you could do to bring some clarity and some definition for us as developers of how we approach this is going to be amazing. But before we dig into that, Scott, tell us.
He was gearing up. He was ready. Like
I know.
Ready.
I'm sorry.
Look at it.
That's the
ready.
big question, right? Like that is the question. How do we actually approach this? How do we do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We know it's a good thing to do. We know it's the right thing to do. But how do we do as developers? How do we implement this into our workflow?
Mm-hmm. Well, back up 30 or 40 years, Scott, and tell us about how you first got in to this area. How'd you end up at Shopify? How'd you go, like we said earlier, from little Scott to big Scott, Shopify specialist?
40.
I didn't know.
What is happening right now? Why are you offending our guests? 30 or 40 years? Like, Scott, harken back to yonder times.
When I was a toddler, I was thinking about this. So one day I'm going to be in a podcast. I'm going to talk about accessibility. That's what's going to happen 4 years into my future.
Yes.
Okay,
Dreams
coming true.
It's a great question. So basically, where do we begin? I guess you could say I got into this space around 2010, 2011-ish. I'm not exactly sure when. That's when I really started to dig into this topic because it was really interesting to me. I'd always heard of people saying, like, talking about semantic HTML, talking about a screen reader. I was like, what the heck is this? What are you talking about? I have no idea. So it was just randomly, sort of one day I had the thought. I came into the office, I remember this, and I sat down. I started working on something, whatever it was I was working on. And I decided to go out and learn about what a screen reader was. So I went and I did a Google search, and I found the screen reader called Chromevox, which is at the time a built-in sort of plugin for Chrome browser. And so I installed it, I turned it on, and I hear this voice speaking back to me. And I remember turning it, and I enabled it onto a page that I was working on. So it was this realization that this technology reads back what it is that I'm producing into the browser. Mm-hmm. I'm responsible for this. So I was like, wow, this is really cool. This is so cool. I need to learn more. Fast forward a number of years, I get hired on as a developer at Shopify, and I'm on the front end team at the time for admin. And I was working on some changes, some code changes, some PRs,
some Ruby.
And yes, some Ruby, which I had zero experience with previous, but that's a different discussion. So part of our workflow at Shopify is that we like to review each other's code changes, review each other's PRs. And I was noticing that a lot of people on the team were really focusing on CSS, focusing on the JavaScript. I was like, wow, okay, I'm learning a lot from these people, but no one is really focusing on, per se, like the basic HTML sort of experience, the accessibility experience. that was going into these PRs. So I started to do that, and I really noticed that I was building up, I guess, a reputation for myself at the time within Shopify as like the sort of like the unofficial go-to person for accessibility, and at least in this team. So fast forward a little bit later, I leave Shopify for reasons, and I get hired on with this other group called Simply Accessible at the time. They've since been acquired by another accessibility organization. And I was with this group for 2 years. I learned a ton about accessibility because I was embedded. I was embedded in that disability accessibility space, working with a lot of high-profile clients, and just learning a ton from this team. So 2 years after that, that company was being acquired. I wasn't really interested in pursuing that path again. So I was like, where do I want to go? Where's my next place where I want to go? I was thinking about it. I was like, I really enjoyed my time at Shopify. I think I want to come back there and really bring this new solid foundation of accessibility back to the organization. I know that we need some help in this space. So what I did is I wrote up this document, 4-page document explaining who I was, why I left the company, what I could offer the company coming back. This wild idea of being this first in-house consultant for accessibility at Shopify.
And what year was this roughly?
This was roughly mid 2017.
Oh, wow.
So I presented this to some contacts that I had at Shopify. They read it. They got back to me right away. It's like, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's do this. So I went through the whole interview process again. It worked out well, obviously. And so here we are. So basically, I'm at 7 years, Shopify, first in-house consultant. It's been a long journey. I've had a lot of some wins, some really great wins, some challenges, ups and downs. But things are moving along. I'm really excited for what we have, what we're working on these days. It's going to be really cool.
So you basically created your job.
Yes, essentially.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm still unsure if that was a good idea.
And you talk about like you were the first. Do y'all have more? Honestly, offhand, you are the only accessibility specialist I know just off the cuff, and it might just be because I see you writing the posts and those sorts of things. As far as that, I know you provide a lot of guidance for accessibility when they're working on Dawn and different things for setting standards for how themes need to be accessible. Does Shopify have more accessibility consultants or specialists specifically, or are you just you're the guy?
We've had a few over the years come and go. But I will say that we have a lot of our crafters in-house who bring accessibility experience to the table, to their own daily workflow. This is something that they bring if they've learned from another organization, or if they're just learning now. They're really passionate about this work and they're really applying it to their own work. On the other hand, I will say, yes, I'm 99% sure I'm the only person focusing on this full time. Like 100% of my effort is on accessibility, scaling accessibility, teaching, testing. I do a lot of testing.
Yeah.
I work with all disciplines, all throughout the entire organization. Not just UX and engineering, but legal, sales, support with partners, merchants directly sometimes. And I think what's important to really note there is that some people may think that accessibility is like a developer thing, or some people may think accessibility is a UX thing. It is 100% embedded throughout the entire organization, in the business, is part of the business. Yeah. It's so funny that I will be in like town hall meetings or other meetings where other teams are talking about different products coming up or different things that we're trying to embed as part of our workflow. And it's thinking like, you can swap this keyword, let's say performance. We talk a lot about performance at Shopify. You can swap the word performance for accessibility. It's the exact same problem.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. There's a lot of parallels between accessibility and things like performance, things like security, how you approach it, how you go about it, how you implement it into your workflows. It's just one of those things that I think people really need to understand, that this is a part of what makes a quality product, a successful product. and you need to find balance between all of those things. Treating them like a first-class citizen, embedding this into your workflow, learning about this, talking about this, it really goes a long way.
Yeah, 100%.
Hopefully we'll dig into this here a little bit more, but I think, Scott, what you said is spot on. But I know for my own situation as a developer, the times where I've considered it in the past, the big thing that keeps me from even thinking about going down the accessibility route and having it be a concern on my mind as I approach a project is it feels like there's just so much unknown around how to approach it. It feels like a drag, an impedance to my development process because I just don't know enough. So I'm hoping in the context of our conversation today that maybe we can help paint a picture for developers of how to make it easy to make that part of their workflow and remove some of those barriers that they feel mentally to making it part of their process.
For sure. That's valid. I think that's the question I was going to ask y'all as well, is like, as developers, how do you approach this? How do you think about accessibility? If you don't, just curious why that is. But, it's, I mean, that's fair. I know that developers have a lot on your plate already.
Sure.
And now we're coming in asking you to consider this other thing that's very nuanced, that's very like, you could do this way, or you could do that thing. So I get it. It's not an easy topic just to like pick up and start doing right away. There's a lot to it. So I think starting small and really understanding how to approach it is really key. Anyway, let's jump into some of the other topics that we were gonna dive into
just
today.
to answer your question, if I were to answer that question, sure.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was a hypothetical. For me, it's twofold. One, it's I have never experienced what it's like to have a disability that would make accessibility an important thing to have, and so you just don't have that gut instinct of this is really important and this is useful. And so not even knowing how it applies to people is one. So it'd be great to figure out how to get some of that experience. The second thing is, again, I touched on this earlier, but since it's, to me, maybe it won't be by the end of this talk, more of a nebulous thing, it's not clear when it's ever done or if it's enough or if you've finished it. So it makes that work really hard to approach because it's not like this feature is complete and I can move on. It's like it's more accessible now than it was, but is it enough? Is there, some criteria that I met? In some cases, I think there are, but in other cases, it's a little more judgmental.
For sure. That's super interesting.
Yeah. And at least, on my side of things, I personally have not had to use accessibility software, but my background is I was a social worker before I did this. So I was a social worker for 10 years. I worked with people who used accessibility software who needed it just to survive, not just working on a computer, but literally every aspect of their life where they had to use accessible equipment. I was responsible for getting them either funding for or working with insurance companies to get them accessibility apparatus. Is that the word? Yeah. There are different things where just to make their world something that they could actually do. So I'm trying to increase that independence so that way. And that's the big thing that I try to focus on is because I think we think of accessibility as like another checkbox, and definitely a lot of times it's an extra thing, and there's a lot of pressure from me as a service provider, right? So I'm working directly with merchants. They just want the stuff done, and it's my job to make sure it's done well, and not just that it accomplishes these basic things, right? And there's stuff that I forget and I mess up with all the time, and I think probably the biggest part that people often table that is there's a little bit of shame associated with that, right? Of like, I didn't make this accessible for somebody, and so we're just going to put this in a box somewhere and hide it, under the bed, or whatever it is, just so I don't have to look at it, I don't have to feel bad about it. But really, it is something that people should be like forgiving with themselves because not only is it a hard thing to account for all use cases and those sorts of things, but it is something that changes over time. We talked about that a little bit before this started, just real quick. And if we have time, we'll circle back around even to guidance over the years for how you should handle images and those sorts of things with screen readers when there's no alt text, and those sorts of things. And so like that guidance changes over time. So people shouldn't necessarily be, feel bad, feel bad in the sense that if it helps you actually do it, sure. Yeah. But from the standpoint of, it's something that is something that's just, it's going to change. You're going to have to constantly work at it. It's going to have to be updated. Something that was accessible now is maybe not necessarily going to be accessible 2 years from now, just in the same way that the spec for everything changes. So, Yeah,
it's continuous.
Yeah, it's continuous. And
I think
so
that's a really important realization that this is not just the checkbox. It's not just a one-off project. It is continuous and needs to be ingrained into the DNA of the organization to be successful, to be sustainable.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
But in terms of the individual, I think that's really interesting. You hit on some interesting points there. I mean, for me, in my own personal experience, I was personally interested in the technology. I was curious. I was approaching this from a point of curiosity, not like something that was been mandated upon me. You have to do this. No, I took this upon myself. Like, what is this thing? I don't know. I'm going to find out. And it turned out to be one of the coolest things I've ever discovered. I felt like I discovered this on my own. So from that realization, I think I really took on this persona. Like, I'm going to be this person who specializes in accessibility. I'm going to bring this to my daily workflow. For a long time, I was just working the agency scene. And no one told me to do accessibility. No one like made me do this, but I did it anyway because I felt like this was my job.
Yeah.
Part of my job was to make sure things were performant, make sure things at the time, it was responsive design was the hot thing back in the day. So I needed to make sure it worked on a lot of devices. And I needed to make sure that it worked well with screen readers and other assistive technologies. Of course, at the time, I still didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah.
But I was learning. I was teaching myself. And what I was learning, I applied to my work. Was it perfect? I don't know. Probably not. But I did what I could. And I hope that I made something better for someone out there, right? So I think that's the thing is like, it's incremental change. A lot of the stuff I'll probably mention later, talking about the spec, they're talking about the standards. There's a lot of information that's very overwhelming. What's really important here is taking small steps. Make this one tiny change that's going to improve the quality of life for anyone over here perhaps, and just keep building on that knowledge. Keep building your confidence.
Yep. Yeah, great points, man.
There are disability accessibility laws out there that exist today, digital accessibility specifically.
Right.
Some of the more modern laws, one of the big ones coming up is the European Accessibility Act, EAA. That one is basically an umbrella piece of legislation that's trying to unify and harmonize the EU member states, because right now each sort of like member state has its own piece of legislation, is trying to do its own thing. So the EU is trying to like pull this all together and be like, no, this is what we're trying to do. This is how we're going to approach this. So what's really important about this one is that come June 2025 is going to go into legislation, the EAA. And from what I can tell, from what I've been told, I attend conferences, I attend webinars to learn more about this stuff. If you know anything about the EU and its laws, security laws, whatever laws, it's pretty dang strict. So I'm not saying you should be worried, but maybe you should be worried.
Yeah.
So this is why I've been pushing this for a lot. In terms of Shopify, in terms of storefronts, trying to help out merchants by providing some themes that are more accessible. I'm located specifically on the checkout team within Shopify. I'm working with that team a lot to make sure checkout is top-notch in terms of accessibility.
So as far as, and I'm not just as familiar with EU and all these other things. Obviously, we're kind of familiar being US-based, and a lot of merchants I work with are US-based, and so a lot of them have looked at ADA. There's been some back and forth legislation, particularly even like relatively recently about, that. And the big thing seems to be there's this push to let's try to seek some form of uniformity, which sounds like the EU is maybe doing that to some degree. Are they also looking at WCAG for that, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So the standard, the EU standard is, I always forget the name because it's a bit of a wonky name. So the standard is called EN 301549.
You should remember that offhand?
No, obvious. I just Googled it. So basically it's a standard that has a few different standards involved. But one of the most important pieces I need to remember is that it does include WCAG.
Okay.
So if we move into talk about standards, we can talk about, like you mentioned, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Various laws around the world incorporate various versions of that standard. And by the way, WCAG is W3C standard. The latest version is WCAG 2.2, which is the current recommendation.
Okay.
What's interesting to note is that the latest version is inclusive of all previous versions. So if you're going to go after, if you're going to specify which version of WCAG do we want to test against, just do the latest, because it's going to include all the others. So it's also important to note that various laws cite different versions of WCAG. So again, if you test against the latest version 2.2, you're gonna future proof yourself.
Yeah,
you're going to be ahead of the game. So just focus on the latest standard. Is what I would suggest.
Nice. And those have different levels too. So we have different versions, and there's this concept of like different levels as far as it's kind of like a somewhat accessible, and very accessible, or something like that. If you want to look at, it's almost like a Likert scale to some degree.
Exactly. So typically, laws will also recommend level AA.
Okay.
So you've got level single A, double A, and triple A. So single A is like making something accessible that works for most people. Level double A is taking up a notch, like you said, making it accessible for a lot more people, a lot more strict. But then level triple A is something that doesn't necessarily, it's not typically cited in laws because it's sometimes very difficult to achieve, but also it's very specific. To a group of users. So, for example, the one that's often cited is I forget the success criteria, but it's basically like if you have a live video feed, you have to have like a sign language interpreter at the same time. So it's like it's really difficult to put in place for some organizations. So things like that. But
okay, and so and I don't, like as I say, we can. I don't want to dig too far because there's this high level overview, right, of like what we're all currently using. Probably is the guiding light is WCAG, right? Like when we're talking about that, this is the standard we should shoot for. This is what a lot of legal, law, what different laws represent, or those sorts of things and what have you. So and ideally we are shooting for that AA. The concept that I think that is helpful to talk to people about, this is that continuative iterative process, is it's essentially impossible, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. This is how I talk to people about accessibility. So definitely smack me around a little bit here if I'm saying the wrong thing. But I essentially tell people like 100% compliance is not possible because there's such a wide range of disabilities, and this changes over time and how we understand things, the spec changes. So as far as 100% compliance, every single use case, that's not the case. Like the best that we can do is the best that we can do, which is adhering to these standards, which is also just a version of the best that we can do. So I don't know if you have a different way. I definitely want to talk about the blog post, but I know like right now we're kind of talking about like high level stuff, and like we can kind of get into specific examples here from your blog post, but I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit as far as, because that's what I think a lot of people see, and Karl kind of referenced this a little bit too, is this idea of like this is so gray, black box, like why do that's I think a lot of people are like, should we even try? Like why even try to be accessible? We're just gonna wait.
Exactly.
Right?
It's just it doesn't help. It doesn't remove the risk of a lawsuit. It doesn't, it's just hard to know if it's even worth it.
Well, and not even from the lawsuit perspective, right? Like if we're not going to be able to account for, this is the baby with the bathwater situation. Like if we're not going to be able to capture compliance for all of our users, why are we even going to try, right? If that makes sense,
and this
bathwater.
What?
Like if you're saying like, oh, you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater, is that just like an American like expression here of like we're taking a very small thing of like,
I've never heard that before, Taylor.
Oh, get out of here, Karl. Get out of here. So it's the idea of like we're taking like one use case of like, if we can't do this for everybody, we're just tossing this out the window. We're not doing it for anybody. Does that make sense?
I think it. I get what you're saying.
I'm also really sorry for introducing you to the baby with the bathwater phrase. That
took me off guard. I took me off guard.
You guys don't drink your bathwater? You just throw it out? That's so weird.
Wow. All right, I'm signing off now. Bye, guys.
No. I get what you're saying, and it's that is part of the problem, is that it's this really big unknown thing that's very nuanced, and that people get overwhelmed like immediately and just don't do it. I think that's what's really, really important is, like I mentioned earlier, take small steps.
Yep.
Test one thing at a time. Fix one thing.
Yep.
That's all you can do.
Break it down in pieces.
Break it down in small. Yeah. So a part of my approach is that, so when I do testing, I apply different severity levels to the issues that I find. Basically, the severity means how awful is this user experience.
Right.
If it's something really bad that's blocking someone from completing a task, that's a high severity, and that's the thing you should focus on first.
Right.
There's lots of other things that you could find and think about fixing and consider fixing. But if you're trying to prioritize, trying to make sure that you're using your time wisely and using your efforts wisely, fix those really big issues first.
Right.
So then the question is, how do we know? How do you know what's an impact? How high impact? Well, it comes with experience, but also more importantly, it comes with actually talking to people with disabilities who use assistive technologies.
Yeah.
Bring folks into the conversation. Bring folks into when you're designing, when you're developing. That's the best way to learn. For me, at Shopify, part of my own strategy is to reach out to our partner called Fable. So Fable is a platform. So they have an entire community of people with disabilities, assistive technology users. So what's great about this platform is that I can log in, I can have my test script. I can say, I want you to test this, this, and this, and hit submit. And I can also select the type of assistive technology user that I want to test this with. So I want to focus on screen reader, if I want to focus on voice user, whatever the case may be that I want to test this with, I can do that. And it's really incredible the feedback that you get about your product, that you think that you know, that you think that's really good. You're going to come back and learning something really, really new and really impactful to the usability of your product.
Yeah.
And you're going to take that away and apply it to everything else that you're doing from that point on, I hope. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's these interactions that build up over time, your own personal experience, your own confidence level in this space, that you take that and apply it everything that you do. And hopefully you share that with others as well.
Yeah. Well, so in one practice that I try to do, and I'm not always good because stuff gets busy, but like just even, try to use a website that you're working on with just, pull up accessibility software, so like VoiceOver on Mac or whatever, and just try to navigate, try to check out, or something like that. Just do it once a month.
Taylor, one of my questions to Scott and to you was going to be like, as a developer who doesn't do this much, what are the tools that we should be reaching for? What are some of the things we can leverage to make this?
For sure. And that's an interesting point as well. It's important to know that a lot of these tools are built into the operating system. For the most part, you don't need to go out and install a separate thing. Specifically, modern operating systems, Mac OS, actually Windows has gotten a lot better. Chrome OS is actually really good. And a lot of mobile devices as well. All the stuff is already built in. It's already there. So I think it's a matter of, like I said, when I first started this, I just turned it on. I didn't know what I was doing. I started fumbling my way through it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Just try it out. If you make a mistake, you make a mistake. It's fine.
Yep.
So just give it a shot, learn about it. If you're curious, you're going to naturally go off and start learning about it more and more as you progress. It's just like learning anything, any new skill. If you're going to learn Ruby on Rails, Liquid, whatever hot new thing is these days, I don't know. I'm not a developer anymore. I have no idea. I'm so out of the loop. It's so weird. My focus these days on scaling accessibility at Shopify, but
yeah. Well, and we'll bring this back because again, we're talking about high level ideas, and I think Karl's point is like really good in the sense that like we're asking about like what are some specific use cases, because your blog post that you recently wrote that we were kind of just using as a guide, like Kyle has outlined, you kind of start off with like, hey, when you're designing like first focus on these 3 things, right? Be sure to test these out. So this is stuff you don't need accessibility software to even do, right? Keyboard accessibility, color contrast, focus state. You can just use all the browser tools that you have at your disposal to handle all that stuff. You don't have to do anything extra even. So I think that's really good. And the post starts off with this. And then you kind of cover these specific use cases, and then you reference code examples, and this other stuff as well that I think is really, really helpful. And I think that's what, maybe this is a good starting place, like where we can talk about that. And maybe the purpose of your article to some degree here was like, hey, like when we're talking about like, where do you start with accessibility? If you need somewhere to start, like here's three things that you can just start with. Like, let's break this down from WCAG. Is this like, it is this big scary kind of document when you start reading through all the different things, you've got the different like criteria and levels. So like, just like ignore all that stuff and just start here with Scott's, like start with these three things. And I think these are all achievable because there's examples of not only like why it's a problem, how do you test it, but also here's the code, right? Like for what you should be incorporating. So, that first one, like cart drawers, missing focus management, very first one. And that's to that point of those main things that you should be testing is focus state. So I think this is a really good example of like, here's a great place to start. If you have a slide out cart, drawer cart, whatever we're calling them these days, kind of type thing, this is a really, really good place to start.
And that one in particular, I really wanted to bring that up as point number one because it's very damaging to the user experience if done incorrectly. So if someone's reading this article and they stop at after point number one, fine. But I want you to take this away as the biggest blocker to e-commerce potentially is the PDP, product detail page. Can you add the thing to a cart? I mean, it's like we don't really think about that. Of course you can. Well, just for some people out there, it may not work at all. So this is a question I was going to pose to you guys. What do you think about this? If you were to go to an online store, you try to add this thing to the cart, you click the add cart button, and nothing happens.
Nothing happens.
What
you
would
have no idea, right? You'd
What
keep
would you do in
clicking
that
the
case?
button, right? Like a refresh, you'd click it again a couple more times, right?
Yeah. It's essentially what I'm describing here. For some people, in this specific use case, if this cart slider is coming out, there's no indication, there's nothing there to say your thing was added to the cart, you're going to be very confused. I think. I think for me, I'd probably just like load up DevTools and start tinkering with the code to see what the heck's going on. Is this thing broken?
Right.
Maybe I can fix it. But so that was the main takeaway there about focus management. And this is another thing is like part of the my post is I wanted to really get across is like, how do we test? What is good accessibility in this particular instance? What do we watch for? How do I know when it's good, when it's done? Right. I think that was one of the questions that you asked earlier, just in general. How do we know when it's done? Well, I want to break this down. In this particular component, in this particular use case, this is what good accessibility looks like. So now you have the tools, you're equipped, you know how to test, you know what to watch for, you know what's a good user experience. Please do it.
Well, and that's so the good thing about like me being a social worker in the past, there's not a whole lot of things that like get me anxious or riled up with clients that if they'll call and be like, this is an emergency. And I'm like, the only thing that's an emergency in e-commerce is like people can't check out, right? Like that's the only thing that's an actual legit emergency, not, and in this instance with, users who like have no idea that anything's been added to the cart, they can't essentially check out, right? Like because they have no idea anything that's happening. And so this is in that instance, like this is a quote unquote e-commerce emergency in that regard. So now the thing that I did see in here, and I was going to ask a little bit about, I don't know if you have some guidance on this. The thing that I always hear, right, whenever possible, is like, the number one rule of ARIA is like, don't use ARIA, right? Like whenever, and that's just this concept of like, whenever you can use more semantic HTML elements and those sorts of things that, screen reader software and everything else, whatever, like semantically understands what happens. And so, but in this case, like you're using ARIA essentially to make sure that we're accomplishing those tasks. Is that because that's the easiest solution to implement in this case, or is it because it really is like the best solution for this kind of a use case?
So basically, the ARIA is a spec. It exists to basically bridge the gap between HTML and modern UI, any shortcomings that don't exist at the moment. So you see this often, like browser vendors and the spec writers, they will create new elements that try to bridge this gap that browsers are essentially missing. But this is the point of ARIA. And to your point, yeah, if you don't need to use ARIA, you don't need to reach for or use semantic HTML, absolutely do that because you get so much for free.
Right.
It's also worth pointing out that ARIA spec specifically is there to enhance the screen reader experience because the web is such a visual medium. Someone can't see the screen, it's a problem, right? Yeah, no, for sure.
The guidance is like I said, just as far as like the best way to do this is kind of with ARIA in this instance, because we don't have like native elements in a lot of instances where we can signal to the user because maybe we're using JavaScript to add something to the cart, right? And because of that,
that's right,
elements have changed, and we need some way to notify a screen reader user or somebody who's using some form of accessibility software.
Exactly.
That, hey, something just happened on the page, and this has changed visually. We understand that, but some people who don't have those visual cues, this is the way to bridge that gap, as what you were referring to.
Exactly. And the other point what I was going to mention about ARIA is that it doesn't add functionality. I think some people really miss this cue, is that it doesn't add any extra functionality.
Yeah.
This is what you get with using native HTML. You only get the properties and states, but you also get the functionality as well. It's built into a lot of these things. If you're going to strictly build something with ARIA, you have to also include all the JavaScript to add back in that functionality and do dynamically adjust those states. For example, if you have like a popover, you need to explain that what state is it? Is this popover open? Is it closed? You need to add that in manually using a different set of ARIA attributes. So in order to fill it,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Oh, okay.
No,
I was going to say, like, to what you were saying, like that's that point of like when you are using ARIA, when there just isn't anything. So that's why you should rely on HTML, because when you are using ARIA, you are having to build everything else in incrementally, as needed, because you can't rely on some of the native things that you get. Like there's what's the HTML spec for modal. Like that has recently gotten like really good, because you get open and closed just pretty easily there. Like you're not having to like write anything else in, and so
exactly
that's instances where you can rely on something like that instead of essentially like creating your own. So it's to your benefit as a developer too, to understand how this stuff works, because you can cut down on the amount of time, effort, and energy you're spending to build some of this stuff.
I will share this as well while we're on the topic of ARIA. So there is a resource out there called the ARIA Authoring Practices Guide. This is a guide that basically showcases how to use ARIA in a way that is beneficial for users. It also goes through very common patterns, UI patterns, and shows you how you might approach this. So it's important to note that what I'm talking about here, this guide, it is a guide. It's not a spec. Right. It is a suggestion of how to do this. And this is where I typically start from. So if I'm creating something that's very dynamic, like a modal window, for example, I usually go to this guide to say, okay, this is the base experience that I want to try and implement, and I'll implement it and I'll test it. But then I'll also go to, like I mentioned before, our partner Fable, say, hey, here's this thing that I created. Here's this modal window component that I made. What do you think? Is this usable? And usually folks will come back saying, yeah, this is pretty good, but you could also consider this as well and make it even more usable.
Okay.
Right? So this is the feedback loop that you want to get from people with disabilities while you're building, while you're designing, to make sure what you're implementing is good, accessible, and usable from day one when you push your code out to the production environment.
Nice. Yeah. That sounds like a really good resource, and as I say, we'll include that in the show notes. If you can send that, if you can Slack that to me or drop that in the chat or something.
Yeah,
awesome.
For sure.
We'll make sure to include that, because I think ARIA is one of those things. It is, and ARIA is pretty flexible. So I feel like you can also, if you don't know it to some degree, like you can do some real damage there too, because you can send some pretty confusing signals.
Yeah.
So it would be a good thing to make sure you're some version of read up on it. Another good one that was in here, that was in your next one, if Karl doesn't have anything for that, the sales price conveyed to screen reader users. I thought that was a really good example that I think is like really often very easily missed. I don't know if you want to like kind of highlight that one real quick, because this one I feel like is also a super easy win, but it's also super practical. So I don't even know. I know you started with the other one with the number one, but if someone wants a softball, this is a good one.
Well, that's a good point to make as well, is that from my experience over the years, a lot of the changes that you could make in terms of making your thing more accessible is quite often low effort.
Yeah.
Low effort that results
Yes.
in high impact, as we see in this one example. So in this example here, the typical sale price that's being displayed on the screen, you have your old price with the visual line through it saying this is the old price. You can safely ignore this. Here's the new price. That gets people really excited, right?
Yep.
But then how do we convey that same message visually in a way that is screen reader friendly? This is what we're talking about here. And here in this post, I showcase how you might approach this using the visually hidden text approach. That what's important here is that it provides the extra context that people need to really understand this content, but it doesn't disrupt the intended design. So you're not going to make your designers unhappy by making this change, which is also something that's really important about accessibility in general, is like, how do we work with our designers? So I think what's really key here is that the idea that good accessibility doesn't get in the way for anyone who doesn't need it.
Right. Yeah. I really appreciate the linked article too on the visually hidden class as well. Like that was actually, I that was a nice little like deep dive on like, here's the proper way to include like a visually hidden class. And that is like for people who are a little bit confused, like if a screen reader will just read those prices side by side, it'll just read them sequentially and be like, $45, $35. And it's just like, what? Like, what does that even mean? So that's what we're talking about here. But I liked the linked article. That was a really, really cool resource too, that I was, like I said, I was learning stuff, man. Like it was really cool.
Yeah. Nice. Right on.
And maybe we're deviating a little bit if we answer this question, so feel free to skip it. But for something like that, as an example, when you're in the seat that Taylor and I are so often in as consultants working for merchants or whoever, it's not a lot of work, but stuff like that takes a little bit extra work, right? And so the client's paying for that. Do you have any tips or any strategies for how to work with clients to help them understand the importance of this work and to justify the added expense that it adds to a project?
That's an interesting question.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. I mean, drawing from my own experience, when I was a developer doing this full time, like again, I didn't need to necessarily convey that this was an extra add-on to the thing that you're paying for. Like for me, code quality is performant, it's accessible, all these things. I just did it automatically because I felt it was part of my job. But if you're in a situation and you say, okay, we need to add some extra time here, we need to maybe add some extra funds, how do we approach this? How do we get people on board? I think what's really important to point out is the fact that this is accessibility is good for business. There is such a large market share out there that exists today that if you don't do this work, you are essentially tossing aside a large chunk of money. So, for example, the stats that we have available today is roughly disability community is approximately 16% of the world's population. There's roughly 1.3 billion people who are identified as being someone with a disability. And the other stat that I like to share is that disposable income from this community is roughly 13 trillion. That's trillion with a T. That is a large sum of market share that you're ignoring if you don't do this work. So I like to share that. I like to share how it impacts the bottom line. Is that this is really super key for business. It impacts your bottom line, and also on the flip side, we have the legal aspect, right? The legal aspect is that if you're not doing this work, then you are potentially into some legal trouble. So there's lots of ways to spin this. There's lots of ways to approach this. I think what's really important that I found success in is how it impacts your customers, how it impacts your business in terms of people unable to use your product that you're putting out there in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I get where Karl's coming from too, because I think this is something from a service provider's perspective, and I see this from agencies just as much as I see this from individuals and those sorts of things, because it's this idea of, we can get this done really. It's one of those like good, fast, and cheap or something like that. It's like you can pick two kind of type things.
You have the baby or the baby clothes or the water from the baby clothes.
That's not, no,
that's the other expression.
I'm ignoring all references to baby phrases or whatever now. So as far as, I think there's this idea of like you're trying to come in especially when you're winning new work, right? And you're competing like with other people, and you're not wanting to like overstate the time, because there's some aspect of this that this is additional testing. This is writing cleaner quality code can take you more time. It can, right? Because we're adding some additional layers here. And so I think that's the thing where we're trying to make sure to safeguard how do people put themselves in a position of that. And I think that's a good point. What it sounds like from your perspective is we're kind of facing the positive of, like this is one of the reasons why maybe you can charge more. Like if you're a developer who writes quality code, that quality code includes code that's accessible code, accessible, web pages, whatever we're building in those instances. Is also there's this idea too that SEO and accessibility are often like linked really well together, and everybody pays out the wazoo for SEO. Like no one has a problem spending money on SEO, but when we start talking about accessibility, then the narrative starts to shift to, well, we're going to do this so we don't get sued or whatever, which is ridiculous. So it's one of those things where when you write code that's accessible, a lot of accessibility practices and SEO practices like go hand in hand. And so that's one of those things that people like gloss over really, really, really often. And so I get what Karl's saying, because I've been in that position before where it's like, I know I could write this in a way that's quick and dirty, or I can write this in a way that is good quality. And sometimes the client's not willing to pay for quality. So then you're kind of in a position of writing bad, not great code. But still getting paid. I don't know. I don't know if you have. I've been in that position before, and I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
You can do everything that you can to get people on board with this idea, but at the end of the day, if something goes south, it's on them. It's not on you. It was their decision to ignore your advice.
Right.
I will say this as well. It's almost like making the case for risk management.
Yeah.
So if you don't do this work up front when it's the cheapest and the fastest and the easiest to do it, if you're going to do it after the fact when it's already published and already out there, it's going to cost so much more.
Yep.
Costs so much more to fix bugs in production than it was if you could do it up front at the beginning correctly when you should have done it.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
I think.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I say we can bring this back to the article, because that was a solid segue there, Karl.
Okay, fine. Go ahead.
We had just one more point to cover, and so
go for
it. Because I think it's a good thing definitely to talk about. But as far as like maybe bringing it home, because I know we're getting close to time, and I want to make sure we definitely hit like at least this last piece, because I learned stuff actually from some of these that was really interesting.
Finally.
No, I've learned their stuff at every point. It's like I said, every time Scott writes something, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I'm just like running through all this stuff.
And the amount of time the segue is taken, I could have said my question. That's all I'm saying.
Realistically, yes.
Continue on.
So the color swatch variant selector usability issues, I think that was, real high level. There's just different ways that we can make that more accessible. I think the thing that I thought was really interesting that I learned was some of these, making sure to test for some of these like pseudo selectors, like forced colors, prefers color scheme, like that was not on my radar at all. So I was like, oh shoot, like this is so is good information even for someone, like I said, that I feel like I might know maybe more than the average dev about accessibility. There's definitely stuff that you can learn from this here. So this is it.
I think it comes back to sort of the same way of thinking about using ARIA and how we approach ARIA. We also think about visual users as well, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say, for example, a keyboard-only user, someone who is unable to use a mouse, for example, and they rely on their keyboard. Can they use this component successfully? Mm-hmm. Using the tab key to move around, can they see where they are? Is there focus management? Is their focus state highly visible and high contrast focus state that they can see where their cursor is. And on the flip side of that, if someone's using, say, for example, Windows High Contrast, if they're using Windows High Contrast theme, this sort of is another thing to consider, because when that is in use, you have the forced colors media query that you can use to your advantage to sort of implement accessibility in a way that is beneficial for users in those environments. So there's different angles and different approaches that you need to consider. But again, come back to this idea of like, okay, let's start small. Let's build in our let's build in our own confidence, build in our own education. So yeah, I think this is a really important conversation. What do you think about that in terms of, as a developer, what do you think about all these different media queries that are out there that you can use?
Like I said, for me, like just learning about these now, I'm going to actually start leveraging these a little bit. It's just, like I said, I was totally caught off guard when I was reading this. I was like, I did not even consider that, Yeah. So for me, I thought that was super interesting, something to learn, something to start like actually checking kind of type thing. Like I said, that wasn't on my radar at all.
It wasn't on my radar either, but it was not on it in a more intelligent manner than it wasn't on Taylor's radar. So.
Yeah.
So no, it was really, really helpful because again, like I said, I already stated my thesis at the beginning, which was, as a developer, like I just found it very murky and undefined and don't even know what tools and things to reach for to bring this to light. So an article like yours, I think, really helped show those small things like you mentioned. Pick those. You had 3 things you mentioned in that article. Pick the small things, do the work there, and having you combine that with the tooling that's already available, really, I think, made it much more approachable. So thanks.
Awesome. Glad to hear it.
Good. I have one more point on the outline. I don't know if you want to get into. You kind of already talked about it a little bit, and if this is even in your purview. But do you have any guidance? Because this seems to be not a common, but a not uncommon thing for merchants who run into a situation where they are being pursued legally for a lack of accessibility. Do you have any broad strokes of suggestions of how they would handle that? I'm sure they would love to hear it, but if you don't, it's fine too.
Sorry, and how to handle like
what's the strategy if someone comes at you saying your site's not accessible? Just from your experience, I'm not asking you to fix their site. I'm just asking like what typically, how would you respond to that? Like, would you, are there strategies that merchants can pursue to be able to say, hey, no, actually it is accessible and here's why, or here's the steps that we could take immediately to like rectify this? Because again, it's a little ill-defined, right? It's not like a 0 or 1 black and white sort of a thing. Like, is it accessible enough? What?
Yeah.
Is it defensible?
That's the question, right? I think part of our strategy moving forward is going to be merchant education. Because I think, at Shopify, we give tools to merchants to basically do whatever they want. This is their brand. This is their storefront. Here you go. Make it whatever you want to do. You can do it. And unfortunately, that sometimes could lead into some difficult position for some folks. So one of the things I want to mention was that there's a lot of tools out there, freely available tools that you can install and basically run and check and test for accessibility at scale. So for example, you can install a browser extension. One of the good ones is that I would recommend is called Axe DevTools. So you can run that and it'll go through your page and it'll come back with some issues that you could take away and fix up if you have that available to you. The other thing that we have is so we have a number of accessibility focused partners. So that partner list includes basically accessibility organizations that you could reach out to and start the conversation. Be like, hey, I need some help here. How do I approach this? You can start the conversation and start that relationship with one of our partners who focus on accessibility full time. And the other recommendation I usually suggest for merchants is to consider using one of our free themes. So Shopify free themes, our Dawn theme and all the other free themes are highly accessible out of the box by default. They've gone through a lot of accessibility testing, a lot of usability testing, and that would be a really great place to start your business on. As well, on top of that, we also have accessibility best practices baked into checkout by default. I think that was there was a big push recently regarding accessibility in terms of checkout due to our sunset of checkout.liquid, which is the sort of area where merchants could do a lot of customization for checkout. So that was being sunset, and people reached out to us being like, "Hey, we deployed a third-party solution for accessibility. We want to make sure we can deploy it after this thing's being sunset." And we said, "No, sorry, we can't do that anymore because we've locked down checkout so much that if you want to deploy a third-party thing, it's regulated to its own sandbox environment. You can't have anything run that is going to change in the experience like as a whole." So this is one of the other articles that I shared in that piece about checkout accessibility. I really want to showcase how we're approaching this, how checkout accessibility is already baked in by default, and you don't really need to deploy those third-party tools anymore.
Nice. Those are all linked up from the original article, so we'll make sure to include those as well in show notes. As far as, so from an accessibility standpoint, like I think one of the things that I typically will recommend, and I don't know if this follows guidance that you would recommend as well, for merchants, not so much so like after the fact kind of thing, would be starting with like having accessibility statement on the site is a pretty common recommendation and convention, just in the sense that it allows for there to be some way for people to reach out when there is an accessibility issue. So some form of process, even if it's as simple as here's the email to send, tell us what's not accessible on the site, and we're going to help work with you, calling out different things on the website that and are working on bringing up to accessibility standards. Those are things that you can do to safeguard or prevent that stuff. I don't know if that's still current guidance, right? Is that,
yes,
if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to mention. Well, you got it, Taylor. That's exactly it. That's typically one of the recommendations that we make. Sort of like more or less first line defense, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Have the accessibility statement there. Showcase that you're working on accessibility. This is top of mind. You also might consider showcasing which standard that you're working towards. Typically WCAG level AA, and then have those pieces available to folks to contact you. If it's an email address, if it's a phone number, if it's chatbot, maybe not necessarily a chatbot, but
Not the chat.
something.
Don't do the chatbot.
Something that allows people to reach out to the merchant and say, "Hey,
Way.
I have this problem. Can you fix this? Let's work on this together." Instead of, if there's nothing there at all, then it really sort of sends a signal like, does this store really care about accessibility? Does this store care about my needs as a customer?
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of the question. That's sort of like the message that you're sending by having the accessibility statement, is that, yes, we care about you. We want your business. Let's work on this together. If you have any issues, let us know. Please let us know.
Yep.
And let's work on this.
Awesome. Well, this feels like maybe a good time to transition to the changelog, or did you want to go for your bonus question, Taylor?
No, we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the changelog, because I know we're getting to Scott's having to take drinks, man. Like we're making him lose his voice over here. So it's good though. It means he's talking a lot. So but real quick, the we're on here to listen to you, not to me, to Karl too. Like y'all are smart people. People want to hear you talk. So so the dev changelog though, just real quick. Real quick call-outs: increased limit for automatic function-based discounts. This is up from 5 to 25. App devs, everybody running discounts is super stoked about that. The 5 limitation was pretty strict, and was impinging on a lot of folks' ability to do fun things with discounts, and so now they can, and that's exciting. So that's updated. Something I was really happy to see, a couple of these new dynamic source attributes are available in the online store editor. So you could, I don't know, someone was like, why is this a big deal? Because like you can just like code this in with Liquid. And I was like, yeah, but like I shouldn't have to like be able to pull something like the collection description. Like I want to be able to make that a dynamic source for merchants to be able to just link that up. Like people don't need to be paying me to do something like that. So, I was really excited though for article, just because that's something I've had to do my own hacky stuff with in the past that now is going to be a lot more accessible for folks. So very stoked about that. Other couple of quick points: built for Shopify category specific criteria are now available. So if you're built for Shopify app, there's some specific criteria that you need to hit in order to check off all those boxes. So it's just kind of the BFS badge is getting a little bit more robust in some of the things, and it's getting really specific based on the app category you're in. So make sure to check that out if you haven't and you're shooting for BFS, which you should be. And then also very, very happy to see, although it's an unstable at the moment, but conditionally disabling gift cards and checkout. You can now do that through the payment customization API. Personally, I'm excited about this because they talk about gift cards at checkout, but we have merchants that want to disable the discount code, not the gift card code, just in Shopify checkout. They're the same thing, right? You put your gift card code into here, but there are some instances where we're running an automatic discount for a sale, and we don't want people to even mess with discount codes because we're giving them the best through the automatic discount code. That's currently not available. That is something you used to be able to do with checkout.liquid. But so that's currently an unstable release, but it's going to be wide release available in the January 2025 version. So, yeah, I've been complaining about it for a while. There's been an open GitHub issue for a while for it, so I'm glad that they got it done. So that's the changelog.
Thanks, Taylor. That's always so helpful. Get those updates from you. I'm glad you have time to read all that stuff because it's just like a fire hose on there on the internet. Awesome. Well, let's transition to the third half of our show, which is the what have you been doing in your week, and what's your pick of the week, not pick of the nose. So I'll go first since give you guys a chance to rest your voices. I have been starting a new app project using Rails. It's the first greenfield one I've done in a while. So we had Karl on here not too long ago, and so he shared some of his template hotness with me for wiring up a Rails and Hotwire app. So it's been fun to dive into there and explore it and learn some new things. First time doing it with the CLI involved and all that kind of stuff because that just wasn't around last time I spun up an app. So that's been a lot of fun. Just kind of poking around, still getting my bearings before I really dive into the logic. But
are you using Cloudflare tunnels and how he's got that rigged up too? Because if so, I have so many questions. We'll do that. That's a whole other topic.
No. I'm actually still using ngrok because I have a paid ngrok subscription. So I just use that. Yeah, but Cloudflare sure works for those that do that. My pick of the week would be the soundtrack to the Amazon Prime television adaptation of Tales from the Loop.
Tales from the Loop.
Yeah. Why are you laughing at me, Scott? So there's this artist out of Europe.
I think it was My Antics.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And he has a couple graphic novels. I don't know if novel's the right word because there's not a lot of story that goes with it. It's more just supposed to create a mood or a scene. And they took one of these works and they adapted it into a series of stories set in Ohio, actually, which is kind of cool. And it's got a really nice aesthetic to it. And the music, I really like it. It's a lot of piano, a lot of cello. It's really pretty. So I listen to that a lot when I work.
Thanks.
That's my pick. Tales from the Loop. All right. Taylor, you want to go next? We'll end with Scott.
Yeah. So me just trying to, when this comes out, BFCM will be over and I'll probably just be done being a developer because it's just all the madness around this time of the year makes you feel like, why am I doing this? Finally launched a theme redesign that was an upgraded 2.0 that from so long ago. I was super excited. It took a very long time to do. There's still some more stuff to do, but we finally got to the point it was good to launch. And then also my wife and I, my wife at a certain point left her job and she works kind of in the business, but we have our own freelance clients and we've had a handful of projects that we both get to work together on, which has been really, really cool. But also in doing that, we've been able to have her kind of work with other people after we're done to just do some extra support hours, which is great because it's not stuff it doesn't make sense to pay a developer to do, but you need somebody who knows their way around Shopify. And so she's been able to do that. Also helps keep a good relationship with those clients. And so that then brings work back around full cycle eventually. So that's just been really nice. That's worked out really, really well. And I enjoy, her actually kind of understanding some of the stuff I talk about when I start talking about Shopify at the lunch table there. So that's really fun and exciting. For my pick of the week, I told my wife about this. I was like, Karl's going to be happy about my pick of the week because it's a snack. It's a food item. Meijer's. So the grocery store Meijer has the best pepper jack cheese I have ever had in my life. Not just the deli stuff or whatever, just the freaking package stuff. I don't know if y'all are fans of spicy cheese. You don't just eat cheese for a snack.
No.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm weird then. So I mean,
First
it
with
goes
the
with
baby
sandwiches and
water.
things,
Now we're
but-
talking about cheese as a
Yeah,
snack. What's going on
wrong
here?
with you, Taylor?
Y'all seriously don't have just like, like when you're a kid, you have cheese sticks. Like when you get older, you don't just like cut off a part of a block of cheese or like grab a slice of cheese for a snack.
Just grab the
No.
whole block.
That's okay. Well,
I'm with Karl
so
over there.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's like a man. That's so I like pepper jack spicy stuff or whatever, and so like usually pepper jack cheese is just like they call it pepper jack cheese, but like it's just a fancy Swiss with stuff in it or whatever. There's not much flavor to it. Myers pepper jack cheese, it's actually got a little bit of heat to it. It's enjoyable, and so that's my pick. That's my pick.
That sounds
I'm not gonna
good.
feel bad about snacking on
No.
cheese, guys. I'm not.
That sounds
Sorry,
like a
I didn't mean-
solid snack.
Yeah. No, you're welcome here, Taylor. You're accepted. It's fine.
I
Safe
think
place.
Taylor, you have a side gig coming up with your new cheese blog and cheese related podcast.
My new cheese
I wanna-
blog. Yes.
I want to hear you talk more about cheese. I think I'm
That's
sold.
I'd
try
love to
this.
talk about more cheese. This is really just the gig in between, my actual true passion.
I don't know where to go with that. All right, Scott, you got anything you want to share?
I am woefully unprepared for this, guys. I'm gonna tell
You
but
had
I
an
will-
hour to think about it.
I will echo Taylor's take on being exhausted after BSM and after the year. So I'm happy to say that we, as a family, my extended family, we're going to Jamaica for a year. Not a year, whole
year?
I was like a week. going to Jamaica for a week. First
Jamaica's
time.
crazy.
I have no idea what's going to be like. I'm hoping to just sit in the lazy river and have them serve me food and drinks for a week. That's my user expectation. How is it?
That's
gonna
your
go? The kids are going to go somewhere else. I don't even know where they're
Right.
going to go. I don't care. I
Just
want the
be
lazy
somewhere
river
else.
and my food.
yeah. That's awesome, man. That's awesome.
That's what I'm stoked for. Pick of the week. I don't even know how to approach this.
I mean, literally
What's
anything.
Yeah,
Well, the
I'm-
soundtrack. I picked cheese, so
Yeah, I like cheese. I
Top
like that
that.
direction.
top that.
I'm also very stoked for my kids have this fundraiser we have for Krispy Kreme donuts.
Oh,
So basically, it's just an excuse to like buy a lot of donuts.
Yes.
Well, it's like how many boxes do we want? It's for a fundraiser. So I'm like, yeah, 3, 4.
It's exactly.
That's cool.
It's for the children.
I'm cool.
It's for the
kids.
children. Yeah. Dude,
So-
you need to make sure when you get them too. Like you nuke those suckers for 30 seconds in the
Yes.
microwave.
Yes.
It's like they came right
I
off
agree.
the line.
Oh
I
my
agree.
gosh, I'm
a
totally
little
there
bit
with
of
you.
melted cheese on top. It's just to die for.
That's
Okay.
get at it. I mean, I'm willing to try. Have you guys had a burger with like a donut as like the bun? Have you ever had one of
No.
those?
It's like a dessert burger.
Yeah,
Maybe that sounds
It's
familiar.
weird. It's weird. It's one of those things like you eat and you're like, I can't tell if I like this because it's so.
You don't.
Or you
It's
do like it, and
it's-
you shouldn't. You're like, this is really
Yes,
good.
it's like
this
I
is
think
bad.
I like this, but I can't tell anybody. I'm never gonna eat this again. Like,
Oh man. Yeah. Very good. I'm
so
excited for
try the Krispy Kreme burger when you eat the cheese.
it. With cheese, with pepper jack cheese.
With cheese.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, with that, I think we've reached peak podcast episode. So I think we'll wrap it up here. But Scott, thank you so much. That was so insightful
Yes.
and super helpful to all the work that we do. I promise it's not just about the money and avoiding lawsuits. It's about the people too. And we'll take that to heart as we go forward. Taylor, thanks for your insightful questions and for reading Scott's article and for finding Scott, connecting us in the first place. And to all of you out there who are still with us, hungry for cheese, thank you for staying with us and listening to the whole episode. And we'll catch you on the next one. Insert cool outro music here.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Scott.